Oaxaca is a small, distinguished colonial city in the mountains of central Mexico. It has a history of European colonial culture that goes back 400 years to the late 1500s. In fact, the walls of this museum were built before the founding of Jamestown. As a center of American Indian ceremony, architecture, and trading, Oaxaca's history goes back 4,000 years. It is one of the most important places in the hemisphere for the discovery of new forms, carving, painting, and ceremony. So when Graphicstudio was invited to exhibit its work produced in Tampa, Florida over the 3 decades of its existence at the University of South Florida, something more was called for than an ordinary art exhibition. You can ship a whole art exhibit in a crate. In fact, it's usually done this way. Graphicstudio, though, decided to send its technical discoveries along with its art. And to do this, we sent the people of Graphicstudio. It begins with people. The way to give greater significance to the exhibition was found in the people of both places. The artists of Graphicstudio, experts in print and sculpture making techniques, and the artists of Oaxaca. The idea was to present the techniques that had been invented at Graphicstudio in a series of workshops so that the artists of Oaxaca could use them in their own work and in their own way. This would give a symmetry to the exchange. In the open-air workshop of the Instituto Rufino Tamayo and in the photographic darkroom of the Centro Fotografico Bravo, the faculty of Graphicstudio improvise a workshop to prepare images and to develop these images into printing plates. Printing has a long tradition in Mexico. Prints from stone surfaces carved in relief have been made by ancestral cultures for thousands of years. Mexico was the site of the first printing in the New World by Europeans, beginning in the very first years of colonization, a century before the first printing in the continental United States. And these techniques remain highly revered in Mexico. The artists, most of whom have established careers in Oaxaca and other parts of Mexico, come to the Graphicstudio workshops to increase their skills. After the 2 workshops are completed, 25 artists will have produced for themselves an artwork in a new medium. The works will then be exhibited at Oaxaca's Museum of Contemporary Art and at the University of South Florida. This impulse to exchange knowledge leads the Graphicstudio faculty to a place of staggering beauty, a beauty no one can be fully prepared for. It is not a place of high technology. In fact, the Graphicstudio instructors will have difficulty finding the necessary equipment to perform some of their work, but it is a place of inspired creations. Craftsmanship is everywhere apparent. Things have been made with care and with reverence. The Basilica of Santo Domingo, begun in the late 16th century, is one of the greatest examples of Baroque architecture in the world. A small army of skilled carpenters, sculptors, and painters built and articulated this phenomenal structure in which every surface is gold-leafed, carved, or painted. As part of the Graphicstudio presence, Oaxaca has invited two artists working with Graphicstudio, Graciela Iturbide, Mexico's most celebrated photographer, and Jürgen Partenheimer, one of Germany's most important artists, to join the Graphicstudio team and be available to the Oaxacans.
Well, I think this is an excellent opportunity for Graphicstudio to be introduced to the remarkable history and culture of its immediate neighbor to the south. We are in Oaxaca, and Oaxaca presents us with some of the finest examples of pre-Columbian and colonial art from all over the country. We're surrounded here by the most spectacular pre-Columbian sites of Monte Alban to the north and Mitla to the south, which means we're in the center of the Zapotec and Mixtec culture, which dates back to the year 2000 BC. At the same time, the city of Oaxaca, I would say, represents the finest of all possible colonial towns or smaller cities in Mexico. It is extremely well preserved and shows us some of the most fantastic churches from the 17th to the 19th century. It also gives us an idea about some of the first and most impressive convents and monasteries which were built in this country when Cortes came in the early 16th century. Around 1524 he had come to this area. And where we sit right now is the monastery, the convent of Cuilapan, which was built in 1555. One of the most remarkable churches of the Dominican order. So just imagine to be placed in this extremely rich context of art, that Graphicstudio comes with a wonderful selection of its own contemporary work to show in Oaxaca.
Bueno, estamos aquí en el Museo de Arte Contemporáneo de Oaxaca, en una exposición que organizó Graphicstudio junto con el Museo Contemporáneo de Oaxaca. En esta exposición hay parte de mi obra que realicé en Tampa, Florida, con Graphicstudio. Yo estuve en Tampa, Florida hace 2 años, invitada por Graphicstudio para realizar una serie de fotografías, y a partir de estas fotografías se hizo una carpeta de heliograbados que se llama Espíritu Santo, con 7 heliograbados. En esta exposición están varios artistas invitados también por Graphicstudio, y ha sido una exhibición muy interesante para la gente de aquí de Oaxaca.
Now, I think there's a special occasion apart from showing a selection of excellent work which has been done at Graphicstudio here in Oaxaca. And that special occasion is that, as far as I know, that there's one Mexican artist Graphicstudio had done some beautiful work with, and this is the photographer Graciela Iturbide from Mexico City. And I think particularly for everyone who has worked with an artist and then will be able to be his or her guest in her own country, will receive a totally different point of view of the perception of the artist's ideas and vision when he becomes aware of the surrounding and the cultural context out of which that artist works. So for Graphicstudio to come down to Oaxaca, to show work, and to at the same time be a guest of an artist with whom they have worked, I find a particularly rich experience.
Realmente es un lugar extraordinario y con muchos incentivos para los jóvenes. Como ustedes han visto, las bibliotecas, donde la gente aquí en Oaxaca no estaba tan acostumbrada a ir a bibliotecas y ahora están llenas. Me encanta ver cómo todos los jóvenes están consultando libros de arte, libros de fotografía, de gráfica. Entonces realmente, y pasan además muchos artistas aquí por Oaxaca, bueno, como ahora están invitados y ahí está en intercambio entre Graphicstudio. Entonces, así es constante, cómo viene gente de otras partes del mundo, dan cursos, hacen exposiciones. Entonces realmente es fascinante lo que está pasando en Oaxaca. En las otras partes de México, en provincia, no hay absolutamente nada. Casas de la cultura, pero muy pobres, no hay dinero para conservarlas. Y aquí es también gracias al apoyo de mucha gente que han visto la labor de todos estos artistas, sobre todo de Francisco, y que ayudan para que todo marche bien.
Oaxaca is an area where a lot of artists have worked in wood for a long time. There are many artisans and artists who have used woodcuts to express themselves and worked in wood to create many kinds of sculptural forms too. We feel that this is an excellent area to have an exchange of information between what we've learned at Graphicstudio and the work that we've created at Graphicstudio, and an exchange of that information with the artists here in Oaxaca and in Mexico to bring some of that information back and incorporate that in the work that we do in the future. Mexico also, of course, has had a long history of relief prints and working in wood. The Olmec Indians, dating back to 1000 BC, created relief prints. So this seems to be an appropriate exchange of information between the US and Mexico in artwork and in cultures as well.
And if this experience is even broadened by the idea of setting up a workshop where the facilities which Graphicstudio usually provides within its own setting are transformed into a new, different cultural context, will be of a tremendous challenge for both the printers from Graphicstudio as much as the artists who will have their first encounter with techniques they have heard of, they have tried to employ themselves, but have never been able to do under such guidance and professionalism as now is provided by the staff of Graphicstudio in Oaxaca.
What I'm expecting from the workshop is probably a number of things. Results at the top of the list are very important because I think under the circumstances, which are perhaps not the ideal, certainly not as complete and as detailed and as we have in Graphicstudio in Tampa. But meanwhile, we've improvised a great deal here, and I think it's important to get some good results so that the people that are in the workshop will feel compelled to continue. And it's quite a novel experience for them, and they're very excited about it. And it's great to work with. We have most of the people are from Oaxaca, 2 or 3 are from Mexico City, and so they all plan to continue working with the process afterwards. And I think that's in great part what we're here to do.
Graphicstudio's work in Tampa with Graciela Iturbide has led to this adventure in Oaxaca. Beginning in 1995, Graphicstudio worked with Iturbide in its University of South Florida workshops. Graciela Iturbide was a student of the great Mexican photographer Manuel Alvarez Bravo, whose work spans most of the 20th century and many of the dispositions of modernism. Her photographs feature people, often indigenous or peasant people, in simple circumstances and with great dignity. She is a photographer of the decisive moment and never poses her models, preferring to live for a while among them, to interact, and to look for special visual moments as they arise. The library at Santo Domingo, recently renovated, holds an important collection of books, including 11 books published before 1500, and a concentration of texts on the subject of Oaxaca, its social and natural history.
This beautiful originally 16th century library was neglected for many years, and most of the original books were displaced, missing, or lost, but in the 20th century, the city of Oaxaca has gathered together books from numerous convent and other private collections, brought them together, restored the library, and so today what we have is an amazing example of sort of the experience of a 16th century conventual library.
Once an informing resource about European doctrine and style, the library is now venerated for its record about the nature of Oaxaca in an earlier era. Its books on plants and collections of indigenous literature are the source of a cultural renaissance. This renaissance, now several generations old, is seen in the work of Oaxaca's artists, and even in the approach taken to renovating Santo Domingo itself, where, for example, an old text described the technique of using the gelatinous sap of the Nocl leaf to finish the gleaming plaster walls.
My name is Noelle Smith. I'm coordinator of Publications and Education for Graphicstudio, Institute for Research and Art at the University of South Florida. I'm here in Oaxaca with the entire Graphicstudio staff and several of our artists, collaborating artists, in a great project. We brought an exhibition of some 67 of our works, as well as we're presenting 2 technical workshops. The entire staff and faculty of Graphicstudio has been engaged in this endeavor now for, in my case, for a year and a half. It's part of our education effort. We share, as part of the University of South Florida, we share the dreams of a multicultural, multi-ethnic, tolerant, educated public.
That there is a much greater indigenous stability here, that despite the tremendous ravages of disease and the change in social order, indigenous communities survived very strongly and maintained their traditions here and adapted to European institutions like the city squares, the town councils and stuff, and made that their own.
There's one person who has contributed to the celebration of contemporary art and the preservation of historical materials in Oaxaca more than any other. This is Francisco Toledo. He is credited with having given his private home to be a print museum, of having motivated the government to dedicate a 17th century palace as a contemporary art museum, of organizing the photography museum, and of ensuring the preservation of Santo Domingo. His name is attached to nearly every cultural endeavor in the city, and it was at his invitation that Graphicstudio came to Oaxaca. Toledo is one of the leading artists of Mexico, though little known in the United States. Graphicstudio's program is aimed at ending such insularity. During this trip, Graphicstudio will work with several of Toledo's images in photogravure. Here, he is talking with his friend, the photographer Graciela Iturbide.
Bueno, Sí, el Jardín Botánico, bueno, es un proyecto que nace, bueno, la idea es de los viejos historiadores oaxaqueños que sabían que en Santo Domingo hubo una huerta de los padres, ¿no? Una huerta conventual. Entonces, cuando los militares dejaron el convento, estos historiadores bueno, dijeron que ahí debía hacerse una huerta. El gobierno tenía otro proyecto que era hacer un estacionamiento en estas áreas que fueron los jardines o espacios de la huerta. Y un grupo de oaxaqueños pues nos opusimos a que se hiciera un estacionamiento porque nos había interés de hacer ahí un hotel y un centro de convenciones. Entonces, bueno, gracias a que había bueno, esta unión de la opinión pública se logró que cuidado, no te voy a decir para qué. No, es que hay un...
Sí, sí, gracias.
Bueno, se logró el...
One of Toledo's principal projects is the creation of a botanical garden inside the vast walls of the Basilica Santo Domingo. As the library holds the historical and cultural legacy of Oaxaca, the Botanical Garden will be a repository for the rich encyclopedia of edible and medicinal plants that have sustained life in Oaxaca. Here, the director of the Botanical Gardens speaks about the project.
We would like to show, on one side, the enormous diversity of the flora of this part of the world, and at the same time indicate how the great cultural diversity of Oaxaca has resulted in a unique combination of uses and tastes and attitudes towards plants.
In a very real way, this garden is also the future for Graphicstudio in Oaxaca. In a collaboration with Francisco Toledo and Graciela Iturbide, Graphicstudio will work to produce a portfolio of hand-printed images and texts taking the plants of this garden as their subject.
A deity has sent an arrow from the sky. The arrow has pierced the trunk, and from this cleft trunk, the first human being is emerging. First the woman, and then the man.
With the hands-on work of the demonstrations, Graphicstudio works with the Museum of Contemporary Art of Oaxaca to provide an intellectual context for these techniques, to explain their place and the possibilities they offer to contemporary culture. A panel presentation at the museum provides a framework for viewing the importance of printing and considering the work to be done in the future.
There's two editions that we did of Photo Reviewer with Francisco Toledo, and I just got done with him signing the prints so that we can take them back to the United States and have them as available inventory.
I think the people of Oaxaca responded exceptionally well to the openings, to the to some of the conferences that we've had, and it's very heartening to be in a place where you have a genuine love of the arts, and people are coming, looking at the work seriously, commenting, and being really a part of what we expected would happen.
And one of the things we wanted to do was to show them how to use these processes with the materials that they have here without having to spend a tremendous amount of money on sophisticated equipment they may not even be able to get.
As an artist, this trip has been extremely valuable, both as a cultural reawakening and sensually overwhelming.
We're also sad.
I know.
Holding her breath.
It's nice, just the red walls, the carvings, the red church knots.
Everyone look forward, freeze for a second, and smile.